Hi everybody and welcome to my kitchen. In today's video we're going to be making a curried sauerkraut. Every year we like to grow a lot of cabbage because we do quite a few things with it. One of the things we really like to do is freezer meals, cabbage rolls. And actually last year I discovered that it's a lot less work to do sloppy cabbage roll casserole, which is basically cabbage rolls but cut up. Because let's be honest, you're gonna cut them anyway when you eat them. But I digress. That's one of the things we really like to do. Of course, we just love eating cabbage. My favorite way is to saute it with a little bit of butter and garlic, and maybe some onions. We like it in stir fries. So it's a really versatile crop, but the number one reason why we grow as much cabbage as we do is to make sauerkraut. And this year I've already done a couple batches of sauerkraut, one a traditional way, so I will talk about that as well. And then just as a bit of an experiment, I made a curried kraut where I just added a little bit of curry powder to it. And it has been by far our favorite ferment this summer. So I'm gonna take these two cabbages and turn them into curried sauerkraut. So for this recipe, you're of course going to need some cabbage. And it really doesn't matter what variety of cabbage you use. A lot of recipes will say that you have to use a specific kind. Well, I have fermented pretty much every kind of cabbage we've ever grown, and they all taste delicious. So you'll need cabbage. For a basic sauerkraut, if you don't want to add anything else, you're going to need cabbage and a good quality salt. Today I'm using a sea salt. I do like using Himalayan sea salt if I can get my hands on it. And for my friends in the States, you guys have access to Redmond salt, which from my understanding is completely unrefined and is mined in Utah, which is really neat. So you just want to use a salt, like a natural salt that doesn't have any iodine in it. If you want to add some spices to your sauerkraut, a really common and traditional one would be to add caraway. Not everybody likes the flavor of this, so you can just kick it simple and have it with salt. Today, I'm not going to be using the caraway, and I'm going to be using curry powder. So if you don't want to make a curried sauerkraut, you don't have to. You can follow all of the instructions I'm going to give you and just use your salt. All the steps are the exact same. The only difference is adding in the curry powder. So the way I like to measure out my cabbage to salt ratio is with a kitchen scale. So first I'll explain how you would do it that way. And for folks who don't have a kitchen scale, then I can give you some rough estimates. So what you want to do is measure or weigh your cabbage. So we weighed it before, and this was 1,900 grams. So in order for me to figure out how much salt I need, I'm going to take 2.5% of that 1,900 grams, which works out to be about 47 grams of salt. So I've already measured all of that out. And I know it sounds like a lot, but remember when we're eating our sauerkrauts, we're not eating the entire jar at a time. We're really only consuming small portions of fermented food in order to support our gut and help introduce like healthy bacteria, digestive enzymes, and like probiotics and that kind of thing. So if you are going to be weighing your cabbage, remember that's 2.5% of the weight of your cabbage prior to cutting it. If you don't have a kitchen scale, a really good rule of thumb is usually a small head of cabbage, like this one, you'll need about 2 tablespoons of sea salt. So if you have a slightly larger head of cabbage, you can up it to 2.5 or 3. And if you're looking at a really big head of cabbage, you may need 4 tablespoons. So just remember that roughly a small head of cabbage is just under a kilogram or 2 pounds. So the first thing you need to do is get chopping. Now, if you've got a food processor and you want to do this really, really quickly and easily, you can just process all of this in a food processor. I usually just use a knife and I'll just start cutting it, but you guys don't have to watch this part. It's pretty boring. But you don't want the core of your cabbage. So I like to kind of cut along these veins here to get the core out. That part it's edible, but it's chewy. So you're not really going to want that in your ferment because the texture of it. And you can see the core when you slice your cabbage. You can see the core going all the way through the center. So this part is really, really tough, and you don't want to eat this part. So I usually just cut it out and then slice up the rest in bite-sized pieces. And because I weighed my cabbage with the core intact, I'll probably use just a little bit less salt to compensate. There's really no exact science to it. I mean, like I said, there is that 2.5%, but a little less salt or a little bit more salt won't make or break your ferment. Just make sure that, roughly for a small cabbage, you're using 2 tablespoons. So I'm gonna get to chopping, and once I have all of this chopped, I will show you the next step of the process. So we got all of our cabbage chopped. Now there were some portions of our cabbage that were not usable. We don't use any sprays, pesticides, or anything like that. We try to use only natural methods, things like diatomaceous earth, neem oil if we have to, like Epsom salts, those types of things, so dish soap. So sometimes our cabbages are not perfect. So if you found, similar to us, that you have portions of your cabbage that weren't usable and large portions of it, you can re-weigh your cabbage after you've chopped it and then adjust your salt levels accordingly. So I'm probably just gonna leave about a tablespoon or a teaspoon of salt out. So like I said, I had my 47 grams, which measured out to be about 9 teaspoons, which is 3 tablespoons. And I'm just going to sprinkle it all over the cabbage. And what I usually like to do, get your hands in there a little and try to kind of layer it a bit. This is a lot of cabbage that I'll have to work through. So you want to get some of the salt a little further down. But as you start working your cabbage, you don't have to worry too much. It'll all get mixed in really nicely. Now, similar to my zucchini relish video, you don't need to make a brine for this ferment. And I'll leave a link. You definitely want to check out the zucchini relish because we have been enjoying that a lot. But the cabbage is going to make its own brine. All right, so I've added most of the salt that I want to add. I can always add a little bit more. I try to remind myself, I'm someone who likes to have, ratios and measurements sometimes. And I try to remind myself that the fermentation of food dates back to like the ancient Egyptian times. They didn't have scales, they did all of this through ancestral knowledge and just through the act of practice and working with their food. So they just got to know that, this much salt was good for a cabbage this big. And, that kind of brings me a little bit of comfort if I feel like maybe I'm not using enough salt or too much. So I know you're looking at this and you're wondering, how the heck is this going to come up with a brine, right? You're crazy, Correne. Well, this is where a lot of elbow grease comes in. The art of making sauerkraut, I often joke with people that if you can't afford a therapist, make some sauerkraut because, you're going to get 10 minutes of good aggression out if that's how you're feeling. So some tools for pounding your sauerkraut. I really like pickle pipes, or gosh, I think they're called mason tops. The company's called Mason Tops, and this is their pickle packer that it came with. This works great. If you have a muddler, this also works really great. If you have a mortar and pestle, you can use the pestle portion of the mortar and pestle. If you don't have any of these things, I've even known folks to sterilize a baseball bat. But hopefully you've got some tool around your house that you can use to simply do this. And it's probably going to take at least 10 minutes. And so as I do this, I'll probably come back and show you in about 5 minutes or so. I'll then add, the curry powder. And you can also start by adding half your salt. And then once you've got it kind of pounded down a little bit, you can add the rest of your salt. But I'm not kidding, this is at least 10 or 15 minutes. And you'll see as I continue to work the cabbage that the natural juices from the cabbage will naturally start to come out. So I'm gonna get my husband to pause the camera because you don't need to watch me for 10 minutes doing this. I'll probably come back about halfway through to show you what it looks like. And then of course, I will show you how to finish up the process. One thing that you wanna do before you start this process, this would be a great time to sterilize your jars. So have your jars washed ahead of time, pour some boiling water over them and let them sit in the sink so that way they stay nice and sterile while you continue to make your sauerkraut. So I'm about halfway done. It's been about 5 minutes and you can see, remember how rounded this was before? So the cabbage really does shrink up. And if I can get my husband to come in a little closer, you can probably even hear it's pretty liquidy. So you know, the very first time he made sauerkraut, I wasn't home, and we had cabbages to use up. He did not believe that it was going to make its own brine. Trust me, as long as you pound your cabbage long enough, you really want it looking kind of translucent and soggy. And so we're almost there with this. It will definitely make enough brine. Now, if by some chance it doesn't, just have some salt water off to the side. The good rule of thumb is for every cup of water you put in a teaspoon of salt. You can always top up if you need to. But the reason we turn the camera back on is we're going to add our curry powder in now. So good rule of thumb is 2 teaspoons of curry powder for a small size cabbage. So because we're basically doubling the recipe, I'm going to start with 4 teaspoons. And it'll get all mixed up in the act of pounding the cabbage, but it's good to have a fork around too. So I'm just going to mix it up a little bit, and then I will continue working my sauerkraut. Now, if you're not sure, start with the 2 teaspoons if you're using a small head of cabbage. And when you're near done and ready to start packing it into jars, taste it. It's going to taste like salty cabbage, but you'll get a good idea if you want to add more curry powder. With the last batch, we actually did end up adding an extra teaspoon because we wanted it to have a stronger curry flavor. Everybody's taste buds are different, so definitely grab yourself a fork and give a little nibble. Like I said, it's not going to taste like sauerkraut yet. It's going to taste like salty cabbage, but you'll at least have a good idea of the curry ratio and if it's the way you like it. You know, every good chef tastes their food first. So I'm going to get back to pounding my cabbage. And so you just keep going. It's okay to take breaks. It's okay to recruit your children. It's okay to recruit your husband. You definitely just want to keep working this, like I said, until it's almost translucent and nice and soggy. So we'll turn the camera off for another 5 minutes or so, and I will show you what it looks like when we're ready to start packing our jars. So I'm ready to start filling my jars. I gave my sauerkraut a bit of a taste, and I did add just 1 extra teaspoon of curry powder. Again, this is to taste. There's no right or wrong way to do this. You guys do you and whatever you like. The point where I added the curry powder would also be the time where you would add some caraway seeds, if that's what you prefer to use. Or like I said, you could just keep it with cabbage and salt, and that's perfectly fine too. So in terms of fermenting, you're going to need a jar of some kind. I really like using the mason top system. If you've seen any of my fermentation videos before, you know that I really love this company. They have fermentation weights, which help keep the vegetables below the brine. Anything that floats above the brine is susceptible to mold. So you want to have some way to keep your veggies below the brine. Before I had this system, I often would use like a Ziploc bag filled with rocks, and it worked perfectly. And the pickle pipe, this little silicone lid here, helps because it allows the gas to escape. Whenever we make fermented foods, it's going to produce gas, carbon dioxide, as a byproduct of the fermentation process. And because we do so many ferments around here, and I'm making medicine all summer, I'm seeing clients, life's pretty busy, I frequently forget to burp my jars, and the end result is rather explosive. So for me, this is a foolproof system. I absolutely love it. If you do not have the pickle pipe, totally fine. You can use a regular mason jar lid. You just have to remember to burp your jars once or twice a day. And by burp, I mean you unscrew the lid, let the gas out, and screw it back on again. The big thing is just some kind of weight. So depending on what you're using, if you're using a mason jar, I've seen some people who use smaller mason jars to put inside. It really doesn't matter, just some way to keep the veggies below the brine. So I'm gonna start to fill. And the wide mouth funnel, not necessary, but again, I'm pretty messy, so it does help. And this is the part where my husband did not believe. There's no possible way that this is gonna create a brine on its own. I remember him texting me and being like, "Are you sure?" And I was like, "I'm pretty sure." I've made sauerkraut for years. And see, I'll show you already, even just this small amount. If I push it down, you can see that there's liquid. So as you're filling your jar, you just want to push it down. Leave a little bit of headspace. Like I said, ferments create gas. So, you know, you're not going to want to fill it all the way up to the top, or else things will start oozing on your counter. If you're concerned about any leakage on your counter, you can just put a bowl or a plate underneath the mason jar, and it will catch anything that's trying to eke its way out. So I'm just packing it down. Again, you can use, you know, your pestle from your mortar and pestle. You can use a baseball bat. You can use a pickle packer like this one. Just some way, even with the wide mouth mason jars, if your hand's small enough, you can even get your hand in there if you need to. So what have you guys been fermenting this year? Leave a comment below. Let me know all the different ferments you've tried. We've done zucchini relish, like I mentioned. We've already done garlic scapes. I've got a video on that. We've fermented some carrots already this year. And we've been doing lots of batches of fermented dill pickles as well.
And dilly beans.
Oh yeah, and dilly beans, that's right.
And kohlrabi.
Oh yeah, we fermented a lot this year, haven't we? Our biggest problem right now is storage space. We don't have a basement. If you've got a nice cool basement or a pantry downstairs, 8 degrees or so, from 8 to 12 degrees I've read, and this is Celsius. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, so you guys will have to look that one up. It'll store just fine. So once, our pantry's in our garage, so once the ambient temperature outside gets cooler, it'll be a perfect space to store it. But until then, it's got to stay in the fridge. So this one's almost as full as I want. And check that out. Like, look how much brine was made. See, that's where the cabbage ends, and this is all liquid. So they're really, unless you don't pound your cabbage enough, which sometimes people do, it's tiring, you know, or you haven't made it before, then it's possible you might not have enough brine. But usually that is not a problem for us. So what I'm probably going to do is, I don't have enough left, I think, to fill this mason jar. So I'll probably use a smaller wide mouth mason jar. And that's about as full as I want it. I find these guys leak quite a bit. So this is where I would put my fermentation weight in. And as you can see now, all of my vegetables are well below the brine. So if you're not using curry powder, yours is going to look kind of like a cloudy water, you know. The only reason, of course, ours is this color is because of the curry powder. So I'm going to place the lid on. I like to leave my sauerkraut on the counter anywhere from 7 to 10 days. So I like to use painter's tape, and then I just write the date. Because like I said, we do a lot of fermenting, and it's really, really easy to lose track of what I started fermenting when. So I just use a piece of painter's tape and I write the date on it. So that way I know when we started fermenting. But that's it. This is how you make sauerkraut. And as someone of Germanic lineage, it was really exciting for me to realize how simple it was to make, you know, this traditional food that's going to help support my digestion and my immune system. So our 2 cabbages made 1.5 liters of sauerkraut. So like I said, I'm going to keep it on the counter for about 7 to 10 days. Once the fermentation process is done, you just want to take out whatever you used as a weight, put on a regular lid, and store it in your fridge or in cold storage. And a good way to decide whether it's done is, after about 7 days, you can taste a little bit of it. And if it tastes good to you and it's fermented to your liking, then you're done. You can take out your weight and, like I said, pop it in the fridge, or you can let it go for a little bit longer as well. But I find, depending on the temperature of my home, it's anywhere from about 7 to 10 days. So I hope you enjoyed this video, yet another fermenting adventure. I appreciate, you know, all the new followers I've got, so thank you so much for subscribing and continuing to watch my content. And until next time, this is Correne from Spirea Herbs.